Hello, and welcome to a webinar on leading devotionals at Christian youth camps. Hi, my name is Sean Daggett. My wife and I, together with others, have been co-directing Gannibrook Christian Camp in Raymond, Maine for over 20 years. In this particular webinar, we would like to share with you a simple way to end the day. Christian camps are powerful experiences in the spiritual formation of young people. And every moment is a teachable moment and contributes to identity formation and the growth of faith in young people. That can happen on the soccer field or in the dining hall or at the waterfront, but especially at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. In this webinar, we will discover how to score the winning shot at the end of each day with a brief but eternally significant cabin devotional. At the end of the video, you should have a clear idea of how to prepare and deliver an engaging and life-building bedtime reflection for kids 8 to 18 years old. We'll call our method the triple S: a story, a scripture, and a simple application. To do this, I will offer 4 of my favorite stories, perhaps 3, we'll see. Stories from my dad, ones that are special to me and um, are etched into my memory. When I was a boy, he would take me with him on Sundays to preach for small congregations scattered across the state of New Hampshire. I loved going with him. We'd sing as we rode in the car, and in those days, that car had a bar seat, no seat belts, and I could slide right over next to him in a simmy little man snuggle. Better than anything else were the stories he would tell as he preached, and he used this simple formula: story, scripture, and simple application. And I'll seek to model this method for you now in a way that you can use it in your context. The first story that I'd like to share with you is about the frog that never quit. Now, how this frog ever found his way into the barn, we do not know. But the smell of the fresh cut hay was intoxicating. The curiosity of a new place to explore was overwhelming, and the rays of the bright orange setting sun peeking through the slats of the stable provided just enough light to navigate his newfound frog-sized theme park. He began to hop around, increasing the length, height, and descent of each jump, from the loft down into the soft piles of hay below, to the rugged rafters above, onto the shoulders of a friendly mooing cow. Jumping off the steps to the second level, he spied a cream can, which he believed would make the perfect target for his final death-defying leap. He jumped with all of his strength, and for a brief ecstatic moment, he was flying. He hit the bullseye perfectly, entering the narrow, curved opening of the cream can, and he landed with a splash in the white, delicious liquid. To his surprise, however, the can was only 1/3 full, leaving him quite a distance to try to bound out to escape. Well, he was not the kind of frog that would give up easily. He began to kick and to jump, kick and jump and kick without stopping. At first, he did make a little improvement in altitude with each try, but he soon realized, however, that he wasn't getting any higher. Now, he thought about surrendering, but life and his future were too precious. He pushed on, kicking and jumping as the shadows of the night engulfed him. The next morning, the barn door opened. New, fresh light beamed into the rickety building, illuminating the dust particles suspended in the air. A kind-looking gentleman approached the cream can and looked inside. A big smile spread across his face, and he nodded gently. There, atop the cream can, was a sizable pad of butter, and on that yellowy white raft was a tired but hopeful frog. The farmer reached down into the can, and the frog acquiesced to his gentle touch, and the wrinkled, rough hands of the farmer lifted him out of the can and onto the floor to his new-found freedom. So, how much you use this story in your cabin Well, as you prepare your cabin devotional, first question to ask is, how do you want to tell the story? What kind of language do you want to use? How do you want to imagine the event? How would you name the frog? How long would the frog play before ending up in the cream can? How long would you, how many attempts would you suggest or imagine him making before giving up or almost giving up in that context? The story is yours to tell. Find a scripture. The scripture that I chose is Galatians 6, verse 9. So let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Of course, there are lots of other scriptures in the Bible that teach the same thing. Now, when it comes to the application, you need to come up with a simple question that you can use to go around the room in the cabin, each person giving their answer. What are some things that they might want to give up on? Go around the cabin and ask each person. And then, after you've listened, make some type of concluding remark and have a prayer, not to give up, but to keep trying in the important things in life. There are some important notes that you should remember. First of all, use your imagination as you tell the story. Try to tell the story appealing to all of your campers' senses, the sights, the smells, the sounds. Help them try to imagine what the frog felt like, what his frustration was, but how important it was for him to carry on. Next, don't be in a rush with your questions. Give the campers plenty of time to talk. And don't fill the silence by your talking. Create a vacuum that will draw out their comments. Also, it's important that you adjust the story and application for the age. How would this be different if you were speaking to older campers who were teenagers? You might ask the question, who do you think the characters in this story represent? And what do we learn about God from this story? Allow them to think of the story in different ways. Let's go to our second story. This one I'm going to call The Scenes of Heaven and Hell. In this story, my father invited listeners to travel with their minds. In it, a man had a vivid dream. An angel came and offered him to see both heaven and hell. Off they flew, with hell as the first stop. Upon arrival, the man saw a table that was as long as the eye could see. The sweet aroma of delicious foods wafted through the enormous banquet hall, and the man squinted to take a closer look and saw that the table was covered with all the most exquisite cuisine imaginable. He expected to hear laughter and see smiles, but there was, however, a heavy air of sadness in that place, the kind of despair that drains all happiness from you. The man asked the angel, "Why is no one eating?" The angel gently touched him on the shoulder and urged him to look closer. Then the source of gloom dawned on him. Those who were at the table had both their arms bent at the able at 90 degrees in casts that kept them from feeding themselves. Frustrated, hungry, and dejected, they suffered in loneliness and want. Instantly, however, they flew through space and time to arrive through the gates of heaven. Now, dreams are misty places filled with moving clouds, blurred images, and wistful thoughts. And the man rubbed the mist from his eyes to see. Like hell, he saw the same banquet hall, the never-ending table, people sitting on both sides, and the tantalizing scent of a bountiful feast. In contrast, however, the air was light and full of joy. Laughter echoed from the walls in all directions. He rubbed his eyes again as if to focus a zoom lens. All the invited had the same kind of casts on both arms that should have deprived them of the ability to eat. The dreamy clouds cleared, and he saw the source of their merriment. They were feeding each other across the table. Well, as you prepare for this cabin devotional and you think about the story, how would you customize it? Would you ask the campers to imagine what their favorite foods were or describe yours? You'd make it your own in that way. What scripture would you use? I've chosen Philippians 2, 1 through 4. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. You could ask one of the campers to read this passage or ask one to sum it up in their own words. Then you come to the simple application. What questions would you use? Some that I'm thinking of are, what are some of the things we cannot do for ourselves? And what can we do to contribute to the happiness and well-being of others? So in this model, you should begin to see here a winning formula, stirring the imagination with a story that leads directly to a spiritual truth encapsulated in Scripture, and inviting the campers to use their imaginations and how to enter into God's big story. Well, we're going to move to our third story now. This one we call the Faith Wheelbarrow. It's an old preacher story. In this story, there's an acrobat that approached a steel cable that reached from her feet to the far side of Niagara Falls. The muscles in her legs and arms flexed tightly, accentuating her chisel-perfect physique. As she extended her pointed toe onto the cable, a crowd began to gather to watch her. She carefully established her balance and began to walk across. The first few steps were shaky, but by midway her gait was set. Her posture was confident, and she made quick progress to the other side and headed back. As she set her feet back on solid ground, the crowd erupted into a tumultuous applause. There was a little girl that stood close by that watched with excitement and admiration, straining her neck to look into the eyes of the tightrope walker. The acrobat looked down at her and asked, "Do you believe that I can walk safely to the other side and back again?" The girl eagerly answered, "Yes. Oh, yes, definitely." The woman made more intentional eye contact and asked, "Do you believe that I can safely push this wheelbarrow across and back?" And without hesitation, the girl feverishly said, "Oh, yes, yes, I would like to see that." The woman's eyebrows furrowed, her gaze narrowed, and yet with a smile on her face, she asked, "Are you willing to get in?" The girl stood paralyzed, her bright eyes frozen wide, and silence reigned over the crowd. So, as you prepared your way of telling this story, would you leave the story in a suspenseful way, asking the campers to share how they would end the story? Would you have the tightrope walker go back and forth several times, maybe even pushing the wheelbarrow empty across and back? You can make it yours again. The scripture that I've chosen to share is the story of Peter's walking briefly on the water to Jesus. It comes from Matthew 14, 22 through 33. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It's I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat. He walked on the water, and he came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me!" And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." What application would you like to make? What will it be? I've written the question down. What's the difference between believing in something and trusting it? Or you could ask, what is, what was it that caused Peter to begin to sink? And what are the fears that we have in our life that keep us from following Jesus? Well, as we wrap up this webinar, I do have some tips to share with you. First of all, keep your cabin devotionals brief. At the end of the day, kids don't need a sermon or a lengthy study. A Bible verse, a brief thought, and a prayer will do. Relate the Devo to the day's activities if possible, and draw it to a close. Start with easier questions, especially at the beginning of the week. In order to give everyone a chance to enter into the discussion, asking either or questions will give every camper an opportunity to respond. In order to go deeper, you can then follow up with an optional question like, "So, why do you think that way?" By the second or third day, you should be asking open-ended questions rather than either-or questions. If discussion lags, or if two or three people are monopolizing the conversation, return to the either-or simpler questions going around the cabin. Third, make sure that campers feel free to verbalize their feelings. Nothing stifles a discussion faster than when kids don't feel safe to say what they feel. Small groups should be the place where adolescents can be honest about what's on their minds. What campers discover for themselves remains with them far longer than anything we can tell them. Be slow to correct them, and instead let them think through their own responses. This is usually a better way for them to make genuine and lasting discoveries about God. Fourth, be grateful for every answer. Yes, every answer. Counselors can also stifle discussion by inadvertently making campers feel silly or dumb about their responses and comments. Your job is to create a safe place for kids to say whatever they want and be appreciated for it. Sure, if you work with kids, you'll need to gently redirect the tangents that pop up every once in a while. But it's generally better to encourage freedom of speech. Your kids will trust you and themselves more as they grow in confidence. 5, don't be afraid of silence. If your question gets no immediate response from the camper, don't feel like you have to jump in and answer it yourself. Let the question linger in the air for a while. And let kids know this too. In fact, silence is often an answer in itself, or can be a necessary prelude to a deeply felt response. Of course, if every question you ask is met with prolonged silence, you may need to take a hard look at the kinds of questions you're asking. With this formula of starting with a story, reading a scripture, and making a simple application, you will be able to make an impact that will last an eternity in the spiritual formation of your campers. Keep these final tips in mind to keep the discussion flowing and make it meaningful. Also, remember to adjust your aim when you have the younger campers use simpler language and more imaginative questions. I'm now going to share a personal story that comes from the life and history of our family. On the island of Iwo Jima in the Second World War, there was an intense battle. When the American forces landed, they found an island that was nearly empty. But they were ambushed by the Japanese, and quickly the Japanese had the upper hand in battle. They trenched in, tried to protect themselves, but there were many casualties. There was a young man from the hills of Tennessee whose name was John. He was a pharmacist mate. He was running from soldier to soldier, bandaging and caring for them. He himself was wounded by some shrapnel, was taken back behind the enemy, back behind the lines to a safer place, and was beginning to receive medical aid. But he could stay there no longer because he knew his comrades were very much in trouble. He ran, going from trench to trench closer to the front, until he reached one of the closest trenches to the fighting action. There were hand grenades that began to land in the trench, and one by one, he would throw them out, either catching the hand grenade or picking it up off the ground. He did this 7 or 8 times until the 8th one blew up in his hands and his life was taken. That man was my uncle, John Harlan Willis. And in that moment, he thought less of his life than he thought of the life of others. If I were to telling this story, I would immediately think of what Jesus said in John 15. No greater love hath anyone than to give their life for a friend. Now, it's one thing to die for a friend. It's another to live for a friend. And if I were asking campers to enter into discussion, I would ask them, what are some ways that we can lay our life down for our friends while living? Well, in this webinar, you've learned to use a story of scripture and a simple application to have a short devotional at the end of the day to contribute to the faith and understanding of your campers. I can't wait to see you do this and to experience the joy of building faith in those around you. Thank you for your attention.